A shocking confession shatters trust between Jimin, Taehyung, and Jungkook, leading to a night of fury, secrets, and irreversible choices. Jimin said this to Taehyung in front of Jungkook, and Jungkook walked out furious. "You think I don't know what you did that night, Taehyung?" Jimin's voice was low but sharp enough to slice through the heavy silence in the room. His eyes locked on Taehyung's, unblinking, every word carrying a weight that made Jungkook's chest tighten. The air inside the dim rehearsal room smelled faintly of sweat and stale coffee, the only light coming from a flickering bulb overhead. Jungkook stood near the doorway, frozen, unsure whether to step forward or walk away. But the tension pulled him in, his pulse thudding like a warning drum in his ears. Taehyung leaned back against the mirrored wall, his lips curling into something between a smirk and a flinch. "Careful, Jimin. You're treading on ground you don't understand." His tone was lazy, but Jungkook saw the slight twitch in his hand, the way his jaw clenched for a split second before relaxing again. Jimin took a step closer. His breath was quick, his hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from something far more dangerous: controlled rage. "I understand enough. I saw the message. I know where you were, and I know who you were with." The words fell like hammers, each one echoing in Jungkook's head. Jungkook's throat went dry. His mind scrambled, piecing together the unspoken implications. The three of them had been through years of struggles, performances, and unspoken promises. Yet here, in this cramped room, something sacred was breaking quietly, violently. "Don't drag him into this," Taehyung said suddenly, his voice snapping like a whip. His eyes darted toward Jungkook for the first time, a fleeting glance that carried both warning and apology. But Jimin didn't back down. He turned deliberately toward Jungkook, his face etched with something between pain and betrayal. "He deserves to know, Tae. He deserves the truth." The words hit Jungkook like a punch. Heat rushed to his face, and before he realized it, he was moving his sneakers squeaking against the wooden floor as he pushed past them. The sound of his own heartbeat roared in his ears, drowning out Taehyung's low, urgent call and Jimin's half-choked protest. The hallway outside was colder, the fluorescent lights harsh against his eyes. Each step away from that room felt like stepping deeper into a storm he didn't understand, yet couldn't escape. Somewhere behind him, voices rose, sharp and desperate, but Jungkook didn't turn back. He didn't want to hear any more. Not yet. Not until he could decide whether he was ready to face the truth or let it destroy everything.
"You think I don't know what you did that night, Taehyung?"
Jimin's voice was low but sharp enough to slice through the heavy silence in the room. His eyes locked on Taehyung's, unblinking, every word carrying a weight that made Jungkook's chest tighten. The air inside the dim rehearsal room smelled faintly of sweat and stale coffee, the only light coming from a flickering bulb overhead. Jungkook stood near the doorway, frozen, unsure whether to step forward or walk away. But the tension pulled him in, his pulse thudding like a warning drum in his ears. Taehyung leaned back against the mirrored wall, his lips curling into something between a smirk and a flinch. "Careful, Jimin. You're treading on ground you don't understand." His tone was lazy, but Jungkook saw the slight twitch in his hand, the way his jaw clenched for a split second before relaxing again. Jimin took a step closer. His breath was quick, his hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from something far more dangerous: controlled rage. "I understand enough. I saw the message. I know where you were, and I know who you were with." The words fell like hammers, each one echoing in Jungkook's head. Jungkook's throat went dry. His mind scrambled, piecing together the unspoken implications. The three of them had been through years of struggles, performances, and unspoken promises. Yet here, in this cramped room, something sacred was breaking quietly, violently. "Don't drag him into this," Taehyung said suddenly, his voice snapping like a whip. His eyes darted toward Jungkook for the first time, a fleeting glance that carried both warning and apology. But Jimin didn't back down. He turned deliberately toward Jungkook, his face etched with something between pain and betrayal. "He deserves to know, Tae. He deserves the truth." The words hit Jungkook like a punch. Heat rushed to his face, and before he realized it, he was moving his sneakers squeaking against the wooden floor as he pushed past them. The sound of his own heartbeat roared in his ears, drowning out Taehyung's low, urgent call and Jimin's half-choked protest. The hallway outside was colder, the fluorescent lights harsh against his eyes. Each step away from that room felt like stepping deeper into a storm he didn't understand, yet couldn't escape. Somewhere behind him, voices rose, sharp and desperate, but Jungkook didn't turn back. He didn't want to hear anymore. Not yet. Not until he could decide whether he was ready to face the truth or let it destroy everything. The stairwell swallowed Jungkook's footsteps as he thundered down 2 flights, then stopped so abruptly that his body jolted forward. He braced both hands against a concrete wall, cool as river stone, and tried to breathe past the choke in his throat. The fluorescent light hummed overhead, a relentless white buzz drilling into his skull. He swallowed hard. His tongue tasted like ash. He could still see it, Jimin's eyes on him, soft and stricken. Taehyung's gaze skittering away like a skittish animal cornered and panting. He felt the burn opening in his chest, slow as acid, patient and mean. He dragged a hand over his face and stared at his phone. No new messages. The screen showed a black selfie camera and his eyes glaring back, rimmed in red, something feral under the surface. He locked it, shoved it into his pocket, and turned back toward the rehearsal room because, no running, not this time. He'd rather choke on glass than leave either of them holding a version of the truth he didn't choose. Inside the room, the air was hotter. The bulb flickered, a nervous tick that made shadows jump in the mirror like startled birds. Jimin stood very still in the middle of the wood floor, shoulders squared, trained calm, emptying into a discipline that only shattered when something mattered too much. Taehyung was pacing 2 long strides and a twist. 2 long strides and a twist again, his reflection disjointed and multiplied. He stopped only when Jungkook reappeared in the doorway. Taehyung's shoulders went rigid. Jimin's fingers twitched once at his thigh and then curled into his palm. Jungkook stepped in, closed the door behind him without looking away from them and said, very carefully, "I'm here, say it. Whatever it is, say it now." Jimin's voice came first, low and measured and shaking in the edges. "He met with someone last night." The syllables bled into the room.
A fixer! They wanted leverage on you!
"Leverage?" Jungkook repeated, a stunned laugh breaking out like a fault line.
On me.
Taehyung's throat worked. He folded his arms tight across his chest and then, as if the pose were a lie he didn't want to tell, he dropped them. "They threatened to release hospital photos," he said, eyes fixed on the mirror, not on Jungkook. "Of your father, and the ward, and you entering after hours when the staff—" His voice snagged on a sharp stone and fell away. "They had timestamps, Kook. They were going to frame it like you staged it, like a performance. They said there was more, that they could make it look like you exploited his condition for sympathy." It felt like the air left the room. Jungkook stared at them, and the world narrowed to the beat in his throat, slick and hard. The smell of old coffee turned sour. "My father," he said, and his voice was so quiet the bulb seemed to hush too. "You went behind my back because of my father." "I went behind your back because they sent me this," Jimin said. And for the first time he moved, stepping toward Jungkook and holding out his phone, the screen lit with a thread of messages. He didn't hand it over, he let Jungkook read from there, as if passing it would make the weight more real. There were photos, grainy, fluorescent streaked, a hospital corridor, a figure hunched in a hoodie, harder to tell who it was except that the silhouette was painfully familiar. There were words, "If you want this to stay buried, meet us. Bring something we can use." Jungkook's jaw clenched so tightly, it hurt. He didn't look at the screen for long. He had seen enough. He lifted his eyes to Taehyung. "So what did you bring?" Silence fell and howled. Taehyung's mouth pressed into a line. The twitch in his hand returned, little tremble along the tendons like a bird trapped under skin. "I brought them a demo," he said. "Yours." Air seemed to tear inside Jungkook's chest. His vision stuttered at the edges. "Which one?" "The one you played at 3 a.m. 2 weeks ago." Jimin's voice, quiet but steady. He knew the one. They all did. The one Jungkook hadn't meant to show anyone yet. The raw bones of something that hurt enough to bloom. Jungkook nodded once. Calm. Dangerous. "So you traded my music to buy my silence?" "That's not what happened." Taehyung's eyes snapped to him, bright and wounded in the dim. "I traded noise. I recorded something that sounds like your demo if you don't know your work and if you don't listen all the way through. I layered a decoy. I needed them to think they had something so they'd stop sniffing around you. I needed time." Jimin's head tipped, as if to keep up with this moving light. You told me you gave it. You told me you handed it over. I told you I did because I needed you to hate me if you had to, Taehyung said, the admission steady in its own broken way. If it meant Jungkook wouldn't be dragged into it, if it meant your panic wouldn't become content for them. His gaze flicked to Jimin and then back to Jungkook. I didn't trust the people around us not to be listening. Not even the walls. Jungkook heard his own heartbeat count time. Taehyung had always had a thing about walls, about spaces holding secrets too long until they mold. Jungkook remembered the first time he'd confessed he hated silence because it had teeth. He remembered Taehyung tapping his fingers against surfaces, against his thigh, against the neck of his guitar like he could catch the room's pulse and set it right. Now in the tight rehearsal room, he lifted his hand and the twitch steadied as he pushed his hair back. I recorded them too, he said. Everything they said. Jimin blinked. You what? Audio. Taehyung patted his jacket pocket. On my old voice recorder. The clunky one you hate, Kook. The one that whirs because the motor rattles. He exhaled, and it sounded like he'd been holding his breath for a year. They said they were acting on orders. They said if I didn't give them something by tonight, the story goes live. Midnights are always pretty for wolves. Jungkook stared at him for a beat longer, eyes dark and unreadable. Then he stepped forward, closing the distance so fast that Taehyung flinched. He didn't hit him. He reached into the jacket pocket, slow, deliberate, until his fingers closed around plastic. The recorder was cheap, scratched, a sticker of a crooked star peeling at the corner. Jungkook clicked it on. Static breathed. Then a voice filled the room, hollow and mean. You know what we need. Little voice didn't say. Voice said business. We have images. You want them to disappear. The price is something that sings, something we can make people bite. A hush of cloth, a glass set down on a table. Another voice, lower, careful. We don't want a song that's released. We want blood that hasn't met light. A third voice said a name. Not Jungkook's, not Taehyung's. Hyun. The silence that followed was blunt and bruising. Jimin lifted his eyes, slow as dawn over wreckage. Hyun was their manager. Hyun had been their guardrail and their leash for years. No, Jimin said, too fast, rejecting the syllable out of reflex. That could be someone using his name to push you. That could be Hyun. Jungkook finished for him, and there was no tremor in it, just a gruesome kind of clarity. He stopped the recorder, and the sudden quiet rang. We take this to him. Taehyung shook his head once. He'll spin it before we can blink. Then we don't blink. Jungkook slid the recorder into his own pocket and extended a hand to each of them, hands open and palm up. A truce, a dare, a sentence. We walk down the hall, and we make him say it to our faces. Jimin looked at the offered hand like it might cut him, then put his palm on Jungkook's left, his fingers small and burning. Taehyung's hand was colder. When their skin met, Jungkook felt it. How none of this would be easy, how nothing that mattered ever was. But he felt something else too, under the rage and the ache and the wish to rewind. He felt how the room, for all its stale coffee and flickering bulb, was large enough to hold them, all of them, if they stood like this. Hands stacked, a messy knot, ugly and whole and pulsing. They didn't knock on Hyun's office door. Jungkook pushed it open to a room that smelled like leather, printer ink, and old tea. Hyun glanced up, pen in hand, smile dialing up like a machine. Boys, I was just planning our ruin, Taehyung interrupted, dropping into the chair opposite the desk like it was a throne he despised. He didn't sit back though. He folded forward, elbows on knees, predator stillness coiled in the line of his spine. Jimin hovered behind Jungkook's shoulder, like the room had a gravity that wanted him close. What is it now? Hyun said, still smiling, that management smile that slid around anything human. His hair was neat, his suit neat, the precise knot of his tie promising order, order, order. Rehearsal went late. I'm here to make... Jungkook pressed the recorder's play button and placed it on the desk. Hyun's smile didn't fall so much as it decayed. The shape remained, but what lived inside it changed. He stared at the little plastic box like it was a spider that had learned to speak. The voice on the recording said his name again, and in this room, it sounded less like chance, more like a signature. When it ended, Jungkook did not reach for the recorder. He let it sit on Hyun's calendar like a bomb. Explain, Jimin said, the word hard and small. Now, Hyun exhaled through his nose. He tapped the pen against his blotter twice, a tiny metronome. "You think you understand the size of the game you're in?" he said, and his tone was almost pitying. "You think decisions happen in these hallways, and that your consent is part of the equation because you sing, and because people look at you and see gods. But you are not gods. You are a product. We keep you clean. We keep you valuable. We keep the lights on. We negotiate. And sometimes negotiation gets unpleasant. You gave them his father," Jimin said. His voice shook. "You gave them—" "I gave no such thing," Hyun cut in. "I told a third party to find leverage we could neutralize. It seems they got overeager. I will speak to them." Jungkook stepped closer to the desk. His reflection in the glossy wood looked like someone colder than he'd ever wanted to be. "And what about the demo?" "What demo?" Hyun said smoothly. "The one you asked for," Taehyung replied. "The new blood. The unreleased. The little god's first breath, remember?" He tilted his head, and the sarcasm traced his mouth strangely tender. "You wanted it so you could trade it because you thought you owned it." Hyun's smile was back like a mask found in a drawer. "I want your music because it's my job to release it properly. You children live in your heads and in the glow of 1,000 eyes, and you forget that someone has to keep the wolves from your door. Sometimes we feed the wolves scraps. They're just wolves." "And we're what?" Jungkook said. "Livestock." Hyun did not answer. It was answer enough. Jungkook felt something in him settle. Not soft, not forgiving, settle like a blade sliding into its sheath. The decision hurt like a pulled tooth. "You're fired," he said. Hyun actually laughed then, soft and airy. "You don't have that authority." "We do," Jimin said. He stepped forward, finally stepping into the gravity of the desk. Into it, and through it, voice taking on an edge it only had when he sang the parts that broke people. "We went to the board last month when you refused to let us reschedule after the accident on stage. We petitioned for oversight and a review of our contracts. They approved Clause 14. We can request managerial reassignment by majority vote of the group if cause is established." Hyun's pupils contracted. "Cause." "Recordings," Taehyung said, lifting his brows. "Contemporaneous threats, and the part where you told us we were products," Jungkook added. His lips lifted without humor. "We're artists, Hyun. That's messier and more dangerous for you." He placed his hand flat on the recorder for a beat, not taking it, just feeling the vibration of his own pulse run through plastic. "We're done." Hyun sat very still for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair. He did not look surprised. He looked like someone cataloging the cost. "You're making an enemy. We already had one," Jimin said softly. "We just gave him a name." There are moments when a fight ends and the room feels empty, limp, like the ghost of violence had been keeping it warm. This was not one. The energy in the office shifted into something electric. Taehyung stood, shrugged, the movement loose with something like relief, and pocketed a ceramic paperweight shaped like a sleepy fox. He set it back down because he wasn't actually the sort of man who stole, but the impulse made him grin for a split second. Even now, "Are we good?" he asked Jungkook, the question too big for the syllables. "No," Jungkook said. He wasn't cruel, he was honest. "But we're facing the same direction." They left the office before Hyun could stand and started saying words like process, like legal, like we'll see. In the hallway, the buzz of the lighting sounded louder, like it had been waiting to applaud. Jimin fell into step beside Jungkook and bumped his shoulder once. The lightest touch, a request, a question, a tether. In the rehearsal room, the mirror felt like a witness. Jungkook dropped his bag. Jimin rolled his neck and shook out his hands. Taehyung moved to the speaker and hooked up his phone. "We have a show in 3 days," he said. "We turn this into something that makes sense when it hits skin. We use it. We set the room on fire without burning ourselves down." Jimin smiled thinly. "Poetry. Survival," Taehyung corrected, and hit play. The beat that filled the room was raw and mean and beautiful. Jungkook didn't recognize it for the first 8 beats, and then he did. Because it was the decoy, but not. Taehyung had twisted it into something else. He'd left the bones and given it new muscle. It prowled across the floor. It sank its teeth into the air. Jungkook felt it crawl up his spine and settle in the back of his mouth. He spat a laugh, and then the laugh became a syllable, and the syllable became a line he hadn't written yet. "Wait," Jimin said, eyes flaring. Again. He pressed 2 fingers to his temple and counted, the habit he'd picked up years ago to fix panic in place. 5 in, 5 out, 5 in, 5 out. And then he cut through the center of the room like a blade, body speaking a word the song hadn't yet learned. Taehyung followed, not mimicking but meeting, his pattern strange, elegant, jagged at the edges, like a heartbeat skipping because it had lived through an earthquake. Jungkook closed his eyes and let his foot find the floor, and then the other, the rhythm tugging him forward until he was inside it, until his lungs belonged to it. They built it fast. They always had when they trusted themselves. Jimin's voice lifted, threaded a melody over the beat, then sank into harmony beneath, dove and rose until the room throbbed with it. Taehyung added a counterline, low as danger, warm with forgiveness he wouldn't speak out loud. Jungkook found the hook because it had been gnawing at him since the moment he saw the photos and the message and the shape of Hyun's smile. He spit it out and it landed with a satisfying thud in the center of the track. No subtlety, no apology, just truth bent into sound. "We don't feed wolves. We teach them our names." They ran it again and again. Sweat gathered at the base of Jimin's neck and slid down his spine. Taehyung's curls dampened and stuck to his forehead. Jungkook's shirt clung to his shoulder blades, and every breath hurt good. At one point, Jimin stumbled and cursed, soft and frayed, and Taehyung caught his elbow, held it, released it, the gesture so familiar that Jungkook's chest ached. He didn't want to be angry anymore, but wanting had nothing to do with it. He would be angry until he wasn't. There was work to do before that. When the track ended, they stood panting in a silence that no longer had teeth. Jimin was the first to speak. "I'm sorry," he said to Taehyung, then to Jungkook, then to both at once, the sentence reshaping itself mid-air. "I should have asked before assuming. I should have trusted what I know about you. I made it easy not to," Taehyung admitted, dragging the back of his wrist across his mouth. "I chose the shadows because they were quicker. That's on me." Jungkook nodded. His anger did not evaporate. It changed direction. "Next time," he said, "you come to me first. You both do. If I'm going to be hurt, I'll choose my wound." Something eased in the set of Taehyung's shoulders. Jimin looked like he might cry. He didn't. He stepped forward instead and knocked his forehead lightly against Jungkook's shoulder. A childhood habit they'd never quite outgrown. Jungkook let his chin rest there for one breath and then stepped back, not pushing away, just clearing space to breathe. Taehyung's eyes softened. He broke it with a crooked half-smile. "You can hit me if it'll help," he offered. A tease threaded through truth. "Maybe later," Jungkook said, deadpan, and Jimin laughed. A small sound. Precious. They went again. They adjusted the hook, kinked the rhythm in the second verse so it stuttered like a pulse, skipping under stress, and then steadied when the chorus hit. They argued for 5 minutes about a single rhyme, ridiculous and ferocious. And when Jimin finally found a syllable that curved into the right shape, they whooped like kids. Taehyung threw himself on the floor and sprawled there, starfish, bones arranged in a fake collapse. Jungkook threw a towel at his face. It hit with a smack. Taehyung yelped and laughed, muffled under cotton. The laugh died when Jungkook's phone buzzed. The vibration slid through the little room like a snake. He unlocked it and stared at the screen. A new message, unfamiliar number. He knew, before he opened it, what it'd be about. He opened it anyway. "We can still make a deal," it read. "The photos go away. You know what we need." Jungkook typed, fingers precise. The muscles in his jaw fluttered. He did not look at Jimin or Taehyung while he wrote because this was his blood, his choice. He typed, "You'll release them anyway if I feed you. That's what wolves do. Then, release them. Do your worst. I'm done begging to be human." He hit send. He locked his phone. He looked up. Jimin looked scared, then proud, then both at once, in a way that made his features complicated and dear. Taehyung's mouth had dropped open slightly. "Cook, I'm done," Jungkook said. "If they want a monster, they can build one out of their own shadows. And if they want me as leverage against me," he shrugged, and the motion was the bravest thing he'd done all night, effortless and infinite, like he was shedding a skin. "They can't. I won't hold the rope for them anymore." The message tone chimed again, tinny in the loud quiet. Jungkook didn't look this time. He looked at his friends. He looked at the mirror, and the three of them standing where the glass turned them into multiples. An army, A fractured choir. Let's go to the hospital, he said. Let's visit my father like normal people and let them photograph our backs. Let's write a song tonight and record it in that drafty studio that smells like dust and hot metal. Let's eat jjigae at 4 a.m. like idiots. I want my life back. If taking it gets me bruised, then fine. I'm tired of being pretty. Jimin blinked once and then twice. His smile returned, small and feral. Let's go then. At the hospital, the lights were softer, the floors too clean, the air a sharp sterile bloom in the nose. Jungkook walked with his hands in his jacket pockets and his shoulders high, as if the air were heavier here. Jimin bought coffee from a machine that thought it knew what coffee was. Taehyung grinned at the nurse, who looked like she'd been bored for 9 hours. She softened almost against her will. They signed in under their own names, and the world did not end. The nurse barely glanced at the paper. The security guard nodded. The night wore its own shrug. Jungkook's father's room was quiet, except for the soft beeping that occasionally reminded everyone that hearts were batteries as much as poetry. Jungkook stood at the foot of the bed and watched his father's face, the way he watched skies from rooftops waiting for something to move. His father slept, mouth slightly open, hair a soft, chaotic storm. Jungkook reached out and adjusted the blanket. His hands were not steady. It didn't matter. He smoothed the fabric anyway, and the shape of the gesture made something in his chest unclench. "You okay?" Jimin murmured, voice barely more than a breath. "No," Jungkook said, the honest answer again. "But I'm here." Taehyung moved to the window and dragged the blinds with 2 fingers, letting in a curtain of city glow. He stood there with his forehead almost touching the glass. His reflection held him, quiet and strange. He turned slightly. "Tell me something good about him," he said to Jungkook. "Tell me something you couldn't tell a magazine, because they don't like fathers who make mistakes, and also make soup right." Jungkook's exhale became a laugh, ragged and real. He didn't take his eyes off his father. He made terrible origami cranes. He wanted to be good at it because he read somewhere it was lucky, but his fingers were too big and the paper always tore. He pretended they were swans. Taehyung smiled at the window. "Of course he did. Once," Jimin said quietly, like sharing a secret across a campfire, "my mother tried to teach me how to knit because she said it would fix my anxiety. I made a scarf that looked like a question mark. She wore it all winter anyway." They fell into the kind of silence that held a blanket instead of a blade. The beeping found a rhythm and settled into the bones of the room. Jungkook pulled a chair up and sat. He didn't cry. He didn't swallow the impulse either. He let it sit on his tongue and taste human. When they left, the night was thinner. A small group of people lingered by the entrance, phones at half-mast, faces watchful. One woman stepped forward and stopped a respectful distance away. "I hope he gets better," she said, voice soft. "I'm sorry if we're making it worse." She gestured to the little cluster. "We just wanted to say we're thinking of you." Jungkook looked at her for a long moment. He stepped closer. "Thank you," he said. He took a breath. "We're human. That means we're messy. You knew that. Thanks for loving the mess anyway." She nodded, eyes wet. She didn't ask for a photo. She didn't ask for anything. He walked away with Jimin and Taehyung flanking him, and the cameras didn't flash, or if they did, they weren't loud. He didn't turn to check. At the studio, the dust smelled old as a church. The equipment was a mix of expensive and sentimental. Cords curled like sleeping snakes, knobs slick with fingerprints from 100 midnights. Taehyung hopped up onto the console as if it were a stage. Jimin stretched his arms over his head and yawned like a cat. Jungkook traced the rim of a coffee cup etched with a crack as delicate as a vein and set it down. "Okay," Jimin said. "New rule. No secrets unless it's a surprise cake. And even then, text me that a surprise cake is happening so I don't prepare a speech for your betrayal." "I'll text you a cake emoji," Taehyung said. "But not the realistic one because that one scares me." "I hate that one," Jungkook said. "And it should not have been funny, but somehow it was, so they let it be." They recorded rough takes. They tripped over lyrics and tried again. They layered claps in a hallway because the studio reverb was wrong for the sound in their heads. They knocked on the door of the room next door and asked a drummer who smelled like cigarettes and cinnamon to lend them a snare hit. He obliged with the gravity of a man who understood that some nights needed a particular kind of thunder. Around 4, Taehyung's voice broke on a note, and he laughed until his eyes watered. Around 5, Jimin fell asleep for 4 minutes, mid-sit on the floor with his back against the wall, and woke up seamlessly to sing a line so pure it made both men swear aloud and then go quiet to keep the magic from spooking. When the sun started bleeding gray into the edges of the night, the track was ugly and beautiful and alive. They didn't polish it. They let it breathe and wheeze and snarl. Jungkook listened with his eyes closed and nodded once, slow. "We keep it like this for now," he said. "We can clean it later if it wants to be clean." Jimin slumped back on his hands. "We should sleep." Taehyung slid down the console until he was sitting on the floor, knees up, chin on them. Expression thoughtful as a boy, looking at the sea for the first time. "What if we release it like this?" he said, half not joking. "We tell them this is the sound of now, the sound of not dying, and calling it art. Let's live with it for a day," Jungkook said. He rubbed his face. "I want to see it in the light before we decide if it's brave or just raw." They walked out into morning like men unafraid to be seen. The city was already awake, dogs tugging their people, traffic yawning into a mutter. Jimin stretched and groaned and dared them to judge it. Taehyung put his arms out like a plane and tilted left and right as he moved down the sidewalk. A little boy mirrored him and nearly fell off a curb. Jungkook reached out and steadied the kid with a hand on his shoulder. The kid beamed. "You're tall," he said solemnly to Jungkook. Jungkook bowed, equally solemn. "So are you, in your soul." On the corner, a newsstand stacked its loud papers. One headline sat there with teeth bared, and yes, there it was, the hospital text, the grainy photo. But underneath, a smaller headline from a little paper with a smaller mouth. "Singer visits father. No story here." The surge of love Jungkook felt for that smallness surprised him. Not everyone wanted a monster. Some people wanted a man walking down a hallway with his friends, carrying coffee he would not drink because it tasted like burnt pennies and hope. Back at the dorm, they collapsed into the common room. No one bothered with the pretense of bed. Taehyung claimed the floor and declared it a country of his own where tax was paid in biscuits. Jimin lay on the couch and tucked a throw pillow under his neck with the careful precision of a surgeon. Jungkook sat on the carpet and leaned his head against the couch, eyes closing. But not yet. His phone buzzed again. He looked, expecting teeth. Instead, a message from an old teacher. "Heard a rumor. Don't let them teach you shame. You were never their lesson." He smiled without showing his teeth and let his head thump back lightly against the couch. He stared at the ceiling. The paint there was imperfect. Little constellations of scuff marks telling stories of nights like this one, long and human. He breathed in. He breathed out. He counted the breaths without meaning to. 5 in, 5 out. The brain learning tricks from the people it loved. "I'm not walking out again," he said, eyes closed. "Not from you." Jimin's hand dropped off the couch and found Jungkook's hair, ruffled it once and then rested there, a weight like a promise. "We won't give you a reason to." Taehyung didn't speak. He rolled onto his back and started humming a low, wandering tune that might someday become a bridge if it didn't decide to stay a ghost. Jungkook let the hum move through him. He let the exhaustion catch up. He let sleep find them like it always did at the end of battles, sudden and absolute. When he woke, the room was bright, with late morning. Jimin was gone, and a note sat on the coffee table in Jimin's tidy writing. "Ran for food and water. Eat, or I will become insufferable." Taehyung was there, still awake, sitting cross-legged with his back against the couch, fiddling with the fox paperweight he'd somehow, after all, ended up with. He looked up when Jungkook shifted and studied him for a long beat. "Say it," Jungkook sighed. "Whatever it is. I kept the recorder on while we were in Hyun's office," Taehyung said. "I told myself it was paranoid. It wasn't. He called someone as soon as we left. He didn't say much. He didn't have to, but he said enough. He flipped the fox in his hand, set it down. He's not going quietly." Jungkook rubbed his face, but there was no dread in the gesture, only a tired readiness. "Neither are we." Taehyung's smile was real this time. Madmen and their choir. The door burst open, and Jimin came in, ridiculous in a large hat and sunglasses like a soap opera heiress. Arms full of grocery bags. He dumped them on the table and started unpacking fruit, bottled water, a loaf of bread, pudding cups, 3 types of chips, and a single lemon for reasons known only to him. "Rule number 2, he announced brightly, as if no walls had been burned down and no wolves had been told their own names. "We eat before we plot. because plotting on an empty stomach leads to pathetic villainy. Taehyung clapped. Jungkook grinned despite himself. The moment broke into life. They ate, and no one cried. And the world outside had teeth, but inside here they had hands. They would go back to the studio. They would speak to lawyers. They would answer some calls and ignore others, and play favorites with their own peace. They would fight and forgive and set sound on fire and see if it could warm them without burning. They were men, not gods. They were messy. They were not livestock. And when the afternoon thinned toward dusk and the city began its nightly ritual of cracking its knuckles and getting loud, Jungkook's phone chimed one more time. He looked down, braced, then breathed out when he saw the sender. It was a message from Taehyung, sent to both him and Jimin, though they were sitting 2 feet away, dramatic little fools. The message was a single line. Next time, we choose the wound together. Jimin rolled his eyes, felt tears gather anyway, and texted back a cake emoji, the least realistic one. Taehyung howled and threw the lemon at him. Jungkook caught it mid-arc and set it on the table like a tiny sun, and for a long moment, nothing in the room was sharp enough to break them. "Say that again to my face," Jungkook said, stepping into the lobby light as if it were a spotlight, as if he had asked for it, as if it belonged to him. Hyun's smile didn't reach his eyes. The marble floor reflected his polished shoes, his measured patience, the armed civility of someone who thought power was a mirror and a locked door. The PR rep beside him clutched a folder like it was a life raft. Cameras breathed across the room in small, hungry clicks, 2 gossip writers, a bored building guard holding up his phone like a tourist, a receptionist pretending not to film. "You can't fire me in a hallway," Hyun said lightly, "or by bringing toys into my office. There are processes for a reason." "Your process almost ate his father," Jimin replied, sliding in close enough that his shoulder pressed Jungkook's. He smelled faintly of soap and coffee and sleep deprivation. His voice came out cool and clean, a blade that had known water. Taehyung took his time crossing the lobby, setting each foot down like he didn't trust the ground to hold. The morning light made his hair look like honey and steel. He stopped without joining the cluster, a tilted axis watching the world spin. His gaze slid to Hyun's folder, to the PR rep's mouth tight with rehearsed concern. "Did you bring talking points?" he asked softly. "Do they taste bitter? Do you chew them at night so you don't dream?" The PR rep blinked too fast. Hyun's jaw flicked. "You want a statement," he said, turning his face to the nearest lens because he never missed a chance to choreograph an audience. "Fine. We'll give you one." The boys are exhausted. The boys are confused by the demands on their time and the realities of the business. "We'll be taking a short break to reassess." "We're not taking anything." Jungkook cut in. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The room listened because he asked it to. "We have a show in 3 days. We'll be there, unless you lock the doors." Hyun's smile finally cracked. "I can lock your accounts," he said, lazy, almost affectionate. "I can lock your engineers. I can lock your sets and your trucks. It's a lot of keys to hold. That's what I do. I hold things together." Jimin's eyes flashed. "You hold us, you mean? But your hands are too tight." Taehyung almost laughed. Not a sound of humor so much as relief that the shape of the lie was finally visible to anyone with eyes. "You're making yourself ugly in public," he told Hyun gently. "You shouldn't do that. It sticks." The PR rep stepped in as if wading into a river, hesitation and courage at once. "Maybe we can find a private space," she said, voice pitched to soothe. "This lobby is a memory," Taehyung murmured, and something about the way he said it made her pause. Jungkook's phone vibrated in his pocket. He didn't need to read it to know what it said. The pulse of it felt like the echo from a far explosion finally reaching the ribs. He pulled it out anyway, not for Hyun, not for the cameras, for his own 2 hands. It was a link, a headline that screamed even with the sound off, photos that smelled like bleach and abandonment. The hospital corridor, a bent, familiar shadow. His body tightened, then uncoiled, then tightened again because that's what bodies do when the past is forked open in front of them. He looked up. The fluorescent lights hummed. Nervous insects trapped in glass. He held his phone out at arm's length, not showing anyone, just holding it like a torch. "Release it," he said to the small hive of lenses and eyes that would never be full. "Go on. Zoom in. See me visiting my father like 1,000 suns. See me bring a thermos of coffee he won't drink and tell him about a song he might never hear. and watch me put my head on the rail like a child. Make it a monster if you need to. I'm out of cages. Hyun's mouth opened, then shut. Something non-zero flickered across his face, the suspicion that the chessboard he'd spent years polishing might not set the rules anymore. The PR rep's hands loosened. The guard lowered his phone, not because he felt shame, but because the moment didn't fit the story he'd been hoping to sell his cousin. Jimin leaned into Jungkook's side. His breath was steady now, the 5 in, 5 out he'd learned for panic. The square he traced with his thumb on Jungkook's forearm invisible and miraculous. He spoke without looking at Hyun. We'll make our own statement. Taehyung's smile was quiet and real. Oh, we'll make several. They didn't linger. They turned their backs on the cameras, and the cameras caught their backs. It was okay. Back spoke. They said, "Here are 3 men walking away, without running. Here are 3 men, not whispering when they could be." They took the stairs because elevators felt like traps. By the time they hit the 3rd floor landing, the link had multiplied in the air, in their pockets, in the building's veins. Jimin's phone choked on new pings until he flicked it on airplane mode with a small, clean gesture, like a necktie unknotted. Taehyung shoved his hands in his pockets, because otherwise he would pick at the skin around his thumbnail until it bled. Jungkook's throat ached, but not with words, just with the raw act of existing under light. They commandeered a conference room that smelled like dry markers and old arguments. The glass walls made everything feel like they were performing in an aquarium. Jimin pulled the blinds because he was tired of people thinking fish were for staring at. Taehyung flopped into a chair backward, knees bracketing it, chin on the top rail. Jungkook remained standing, the kinetic bolt in his spine insisting movement or combustion. "We need counsel," Jimin said, and the word tasted grown. "Not company counsel, ours. I already texted Minji," Taehyung said, tapping his temple. "5 minutes ago, downstairs. She helped me get out of that ridiculous sponsorship in 21, where they wanted me to pretend to love kombucha. I didn't. I won't lie about bacteria." Jimin snorted despite the quake in his chest. "You did lie. You said, 'This is interesting,' on camera." "I'm a poet," Taehyung said. "It was interesting. Like a crime scene. Focus," Jungkook said without edge. Just a reminder that felt like a hand on both their backs. Minji arrived like an answer to prayer you weren't sure anyone was listening to. She wore a suit, the color of dust, and a mouth the color of refusal. She put her bag down in a small, exact radius around her chair like a spell circle. She did not hug them. She did not smile. She looked at Jungkook, at Jimin, at Taehyung and said, "Tell me the part you can't take back." They told her. The recorder, Hyun's office. The voice on the tape using his name like a key. The threat. The decoy demo. The hospital photos. The lobby. The link in their blood. They didn't perform. They spoke like witnesses who wanted verdict more than applause. Minji listened like a surgeon watches a heart monitor eyes on the shape of the peaks, the rhythm, the falses. When they were done, she said, "Okay." "Okay, what?" Jimin asked, small. "Okay, we move," Minji replied. "Do not delete anything. Send me copies of the recordings and the messages. I'll file a preservation notice. If Hyun sneezes in the direction of a shredder, I'll make it his last sneeze as a man with a job. I'll petition for a temporary restraining order to keep him from interfering with your show, your accounts, your movement. It'll be rough, but winnable. In the meantime, you do exactly what you were planning to do." "And what's that?" Taehyung asked, both mocking and sincere. "Make art, make noise, make an honest mess," Minji said. "Be human on purpose. Put your own oxygen mask on, and then shove it down the throat of anyone who tries to take it." Jungkook's laugh cracked like thunder. "Marry me," he said, and Minji didn't blink. "After the tro," she replied dryly, and then her mouth softened, a private weather. "I'm sorry about your father," she added to Jungkook. "Not as strategy, not as performance. The law won't fix that part, but we can make sure no one uses him for anything but love." Silence fell in the room that didn't have to be filled. The blinds let in a pale wash of light. Taehyung drummed fingers against the chair back, a tic he sometimes hated but right now let run until his skin hummed the same rhythm as his spine. Jimin rubbed at his jaw where stress collected, small and stubborn. Jungkook's shoulders came down a notch, not relaxed, but ready. "Statement at noon," Jimin decided, looking to them only to be polite. "Not notes, not spin. Our mouths, our faces. We put the rough track out before sunset. No rollout, no promo. We let it crawl if it wants. Yes, Taehyung said. Yes. And yes, Minji nodded. I'll draft the legal guardrails and call the board. They'll pretend not to be shocked. They'll be delighted to have a reason to act like adults. She stood, gathering the air around her like a cloak. One more thing. He'll hit back. Not just with papers, with whispers, with people you think are watchers but are actually mouths. Be careful who you bleed in front of. Taehyung flinched slightly, an old memory waking under the skin. Noted. After Minji left, the room felt bigger. They stood without standing ovations. Jimin stretched like he was trying to put bones back where they belonged. Water, he said. Please someone be the hydration police before I go feral. Taehyung tossed him a bottle with lazy precision. Jungkook caught another. The water was warm and tasted faintly of plastic. It tasted like relief, anyway. They set up a camera on a cheap tripod in the rehearsal room they trusted even when it lied to them about mirrors. Jimin checked the frame, moved a half-empty coffee cup out of the shot, left the rest. The bulb overhead still flickered, nerves in a socket. Taehyung didn't try to fix it. The imperfection belonged. Jungkook looked into the lens. It was only glass. It had never been anything else, except the whole world. Sometimes. He rubbed his palms together and then let them be. Ready? He asked. Not because he needed permission, because they had learned how to ask. Jimin nodded. Taehyung's chin dipped. Jungkook hit record. No titles, no lower thirds, no music bed to convince strangers how to feel. Just 3 men in a room that smelled like sweat and history. Jimin started. We saw the photos too, he said, voice steady, eyes clear. They're real. The moment was real. The story wrapped around them wasn't. Taehyung took the baton without looking at anyone for cues. Someone thought they could scare us into forgetting we're human. It almost worked, which is the worst thing I'll admit on camera. We were scared. We made choices in shadows. We won't do that again. Jungkook leaned in, elbows on his knees, his hands hanging loose like he had nothing to hide because in this precise moment he didn't. My father is sick. I visit him at night because the day is sometimes a machine that doesn't let me have a face. The night is quieter. That's it. There's no ghost. There's no God. There's only a sun and a man with a blanket. He exhaled. It fogged the lens, maybe only in his head. We're releasing a song tonight. It's not a single. It's not a strategy. It's the sound of the last 12 hours. If you want to hear what fury and love and the stupid stubbornness of choosing each other sounds like, there it is. If you don't, that's okay too. We're not here to convince you of anything. We're here to stop being quiet in rooms where someone else holds the lights. Jimin looked down, quick, then back up. And this part is important. If you ever defended us when you didn't have to, thank you. If you ever criticized us because you wanted us to be better, thank you. If you only watch because you like to collect people's broken pieces, I hope someday someone loves you until you can't. Taehyung smiled into the lens, little and devastating. We won't be answering questions today. We'll be at the studio. And later, I'll post a photo of a cake emoji to confuse you. They stopped the recording. The room didn't change, but something inside their chests did. Jimin flopped onto the floor and spread his arms out like he might hug the building. Taehyung crouched and poked him in the ribs. Jimin squeaked, a normal sound in a day not in danger of having many. Jungkook transferred the video to his phone, typed 3 sentences that didn't try to be poetry, and hit post before he could hesitate. The response moved like weather, fast and arguing with itself. Comments rolled. A chaos soup of love and fury and conspiracy. A trending tag grew teeth and then lost them because a second story about a politician's dog eating a fax machine elbowed in. The world kept being the world. The 3 of them kept being the 3 of them. Minji texted. TRO filed. Emergency hearing at 3 p.m. Don't panic if the judge is brusque. That's just how she keeps her hair in place. They laughed for real at that, short and grateful. Then, they went to the studio. The rough track did not behave. It rushed them, and then refused to move. It snarled, and then slept. Jimin tried a note 3 times, and couldn't land it. Each miss tasting like old failure he thought he'd outgrown. Taehyung played a line on guitar that sounded like a wire on the verge of snapping and then couldn't find it again. Jungkook forgot lyrics he had written an hour ago. That strange amnesia that comes when the brain goes on strike. Again, Jimin said through his teeth, and the word wasn't anger at them. It was an incantation. Again. Taehyung ikyoed kieter. Again, Jungkook said, softer still, and pressed the spacebar. They found a pocket finally, a groove that felt like a river curving with the land instead of carving it bloody. Jimin's voice settled into it with a sigh that caught at the end. Taehyung held the harmony like it was a small animal he didn't want to frighten. Jungkook rode the chorus like a wave that would not drown him if he remembered to breathe. When they listened back, no one spoke for a minute. The track was imperfect. It was also true. It made Jimin's skin prickle the way certain truths do when they almost don't want to be said. Taehyung broke first, pinching the bridge of his nose like he was trying to squeeze tears back into his skull. "I signed something," he said abruptly. Jungkook's head snapped around. Jimin didn't look up. He stared at the digital waveform on the screen like it might reveal the shape of this new confession if he watched long enough. "What did you sign?" Taehyung chewed his lower lip. A boy caught between shame and mischief. 3 years ago. After that mess with the choreography oversight and the broken light rig, they brought me a rider and said it was to make sure I could have candles backstage. It was a joke. I signed without reading because I was performing contrition to make a room full of grown fists feel safe. It wasn't just a rider. He swallowed. There's a clause about crisis management. It lets them use my likeness in PR materials without approval if they deem it necessary to mitigate reputational damage. Jimin's head came up slowly. "Your likeness," he repeated, the syllables tasting wrong, like sour milk. "It's how they get to tell my mouth to say sorry if they want," Taehyung said, wry and a little wrecked. "They can put my face on something and call it a statement if I haven't preemptively provided one." Hyun used it twice. Once a caption about an airport incident. Once a note about a delayed meet and greet. It was small. I didn't fight because it wasn't worth a war those days. Today is different. Jungkook's pulse thrummed hard enough to make him lightheaded. He pressed his tongue to the roof of his mouth, a stupid trick Minji taught him to keep words from jumping out. "Show me." Taehyung pulled the document up on his phone. The language was neat and oily. Jimin read over his shoulder, mouth flattening at every comma. Jungkook felt a tide rise in his chest, like a storm he could taste. "We burn it," Jimin said, quiet and lethal. "We can't," Taehyung replied. "But we can make it irrelevant." "How?" Jungkook asked. And the word was simple but honest, a tool being handed across a workbench. "By speaking faster than their mouths," Taehyung said. "By filling every minute with our version. By making it ridiculous to accept an image of me apologizing that was written by someone who thinks kombucha is a personality. By making noise that sounds like us," Jimin added. And the simplicity of it was the relief. They didn't get to finish mixing. A calendar reminder cleaved the day. Minji waited outside the courthouse looking like a crow and a blessing. The judge was brusque. Her hair was perfect. She frowned at Minji and frowned at Hyun's lawyer and frowned at the collective concept of celebrity like it had once broken her toaster. She asked sharp questions, cut off sloppy answers, read the recorder's transcript with her eyebrows halfway to God. When she ruled, she did it like she was telling a child to sit down. Temporary restraining order granted in substantial part. Hyun was enjoined from interfering with their accounts, their rehearsal spaces, their communications with vendors. He was permitted to attend the show if he purchased a public ticket. He was not permitted to speak on their behalf. He was not permitted to contact them except through counsel. The gavel's absence didn't matter. The sound lived in the bones of the room. Outside, Hyun's lawyer tried to salvage dignity from the wreckage. "This is a misunderstanding," he started, the oldest song, but Minji cut him with a smile so precise it could slice bread. "Tell your client to drink water," she said, and shepherded the three of them away like a storm herding leaves. They released the track at 6:30, in the ugly hour when daylight couldn't decide whether to leave. They put it on a platform that didn't ask for favors. They attached a caption that didn't ask for forgiveness. They pressed a button and then took their hands off it like you release a bird after nursing it back, knowing it might fly into a window anyway. They didn't watch the numbers. They ate noodles too fast, and Jimin burned his tongue and swore elaborately, and Taehyung told him to apologize to his taste buds, and Jungkook laughed in a way that made the ceiling less heavy. The song moved through the world. It stumbled in some places. knocked over a jar of daisies in a small-town kitchen, made a teenage boy stop and listen in a bus shelter, made one critic roll his eyes and then listen again, made a woman on a treadmill start to cry without knowing exactly why. It didn't change anything, and it changed some things, which is to say, it did exactly what art has always done. The song moved through the world. It stumbled in some places, knocked over a jar of daisies in a small-town kitchen, made a teenage boy stop and listen in a bus shelter, made one critic roll his eyes and then listen again, made a woman on a treadmill start to cry without knowing exactly why. It didn't change anything, and it changed some things, which is to say, it did exactly what art has always done. There were surprises. A veteran producer they admired left a comment under the post that didn't try to be clever. It said, "This is the sound of not dying. Keep going." A rival they'd quietly envied for years sent a DM that said simply, "If you need my drummer, he's yours tonight." A tabloid ran a headline that read, "Jimin, Taehyung, Jungkook blow up their own house and walk out smiling," and beneath it, a column that almost expected them to fail. The columnist's cynicism was so tidy it hardly smelled like blood. They did not fight that night, not with each other. They argued with themselves. Jimin's hands shook when the doorbell startled him, and he hated that old fracture in his nervous system with a hot, quiet fury that, left unchecked, turned into a monologue about uselessness. Jungkook sat with him on the kitchen floor until the monologue ran out of ink. He didn't fix. He was a body that stayed, which was sometimes the only spell that worked. Taehyung disappeared onto the roof for 20 minutes and came back smelling like rain. He said nothing. His mouth was swollen with unshed prayers. Jungkook put a slice of apple in his hand like an offering. Taehyung ate it in 3 bites, the final one loud enough to make them both choke on laughter. Later, in the dim, their phones glowed with a different kind of light. The hospital, a nurse with a kind temper wrote, "He's been more restless today." It might be nothing. It might be something. If you can come, come. They went. Tires on wet streets. Neon reflected in puddles like the city had been practicing sadness and got good at it. The hospital smelled familiar in a way that made Jungkook want to claw out of his skin. The nurse smiled without pity. The room welcomed them like a fist unclenching. His father slept and woke and slept again. Or maybe he dreamed his eyes open. Hard to tell. Jungkook took his hand. The skin was thinner, the veins a blue map, the bones still unquestionably his father's. He felt the pulse, small, stubborn. "Hey," he said, voice barely more than a thought. "We made a mess." His father's mouth moved. No miracle, just a twitch. But then his eyes opened completely. And there it was, that elusive light, that particular attention that made Jungkook feel 16 and 6 in 100. "Song," his father said, the syllable a pebble and a sunrise. Jimin's breath punched out of him. Taehyung made a sound he hadn't meant to make, and then pretended he hadn't. Jungkook smiled with his whole face. "Yeah," he said. "We made a song." "Sing," his father said, and the syllable turned Jungkook to salt. They did, not loud, not polished. Jimin took the melody because his voice could tuck itself into a room and make that room a chest. Taehyung wove under him, a low line like a river under a road. Jungkook sang the part that didn't have words yet, a string of vowels that tasted like rain and relief. Nurses passed the door and did not shush them. A janitor paused with his mop in the hallway and rested his head against the handle and closed his eyes for exactly 12 seconds. When they finished, his father's eyes were still open. A tear balanced on the lower lid like it had decided to be brave and then changed its mind. Jungkook leaned down and kissed his knuckles, not like a son in a movie, but like a man who knew the texture of that skin better than his own. They didn't stay long. There are rules for the body that grief doesn't get to break. On the way out, the woman from the other night was there again, hair messy, paperback held open with a finger. She looked up, saw them, and didn't stand. She said, "Good night," like neighbors in a hallway. They said it back. Back home, the flat smelled like noodle spice and sweat, and the faint ozone of turned-off equipment. The track played quiet from a laptop speaker, the edges blunted by the tin. It sounded like someone else's song for a second, and then it didn't. "Tomorrow," Jimin said, sinking onto the couch like a punchline. "We practice the live set that makes this night make sense." "Tomorrow," Taehyung agreed. curling into the corner of the sofa with the fox paperweight balanced on his stomach like a tame animal. I will admit to Minji that I stole a thing from Hyun's office and ask her how to return it in a way that feels like a poem and not a confession. Tomorrow, Jungkook said, turning off notifications one by one until the phone fell silent like a forest after rain. We don't apologize for breath. They didn't make promises they couldn't keep. They didn't swear to never fight again or to always trust perfectly. They pledged the only vows that had value anymore. To show up when they didn't want to talk when talking felt like trying to pick a lock with a cooked noodle, to sing when silence tried to bite again. It was small and enormous. It was human